So we should be live now. Finn, can you you can hear me there? Good. Right, so I'm just going to bring the slides up to the front. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the second of our webinars on, or for lawyers, on stuff relating to technology for lawyers and how technology can help make lawyers or help lawyers to do business better. And the topic of this webinar is lawyering in the cloud. I'm going to be the presenter today, and then our digital marketing person is just going to be there as well, just to let you know if some of the technology is going astray while I'm using it, and to give me a hand as and when needed. So thanks for tuning in. So I'll just give a quick bit of background about our journey towards being a law firm that operates fully in the cloud. So Simmonds Stewart started in 2006, and there was just two of us. We had a couple of laptops, and we started out with an Exchange server. So we wanted to be able to, you know, have all of our files and documents and emails saved on a server. And so that was a configuration we had right from day one. Funnily enough, as we started, there was two of us in a in one serviced office with a server sitting in between us. So it wasn't a particularly flash setup, but that was pretty effective for us. It lasted us through till 2012. Obviously, there was a bunch of sort of equipment upgrades in that time, and I think we had as many as 7, maybe 8 lawyers or 8 people anyway running on that server configuration. But we had outgrown it by about 2012, which was when we were thinking about setting up an Auckland office. And at that point, we moved to a desktop as a service solution, which I think a lot of lawyers will, at least smaller law firms anyway, will be familiar with. It's where you have a PC or a laptop and you log on to a remote server, and that remote server application takes over your screen, and you're looking at your desktop that's being presented to you from a remote location. And it's called a bunch of different things. Sometimes it's called a VPN or a Citrix solution, but I think the most common terminology for it at the moment is desktop as a service. And it's as if you're not, well, you're not working on applications on your own computer. You're manipulating applications that are operating on a remote server that's multi-tenanted and servicing lots of different customers. And that served us pretty well for 4 or 5 years. It meant that we were able to run 2 offices and to have exactly the same desktop, and not to have the hassle of maintaining a server and backup and all the rest of it across multiple locations, which adds to the complexity. But there was 2 frustrations, I guess, we experienced with it. The first was that the desktop as a service offerings are quite locked down in terms of the ways that you can use and customize Outlook and some of the other Microsoft features, which I personally found frustrating. And the second thing was, for us, we were increasingly using lots of web-based applications to grow our business, and it didn't seem very efficient to be going onto the internet to log on to a remote server that would then open up a browser remotely, and then that browser would connect to web applications, and we would effectively be using stuff on the internet 2 steps removed, whereas it would be much more efficient and a better sort of user experience to be opening the browser on our own computer and going directly to those applications that way. I guess there was a third consideration, and we were also in mind of opening an office in Singapore, and we were a bit doubtful about whether this desktop as a service solution with a server based in New Zealand was going to work that well for our office in Singapore, and particularly that kind of lag of logging into a very remote server at that point and then tunneling back into internet applications that way just seemed to us to be likely to be quite frustrating for our people up in Singapore. But that wasn't the primary driver. The primary driver was the other 2 things I mentioned. So in 2016, we moved to an Office 365 based system. So stayed with Microsoft, and really as a lawyer, you don't have many other options really. You want to be able to use Word and its document markup features, and certainly I much prefer using Outlook to any of the other kind of email apps. But the need to use Word as a lawyer means you are pretty tightly tied to Microsoft. And but what Office 365 enabled us to do was to have all of the Microsoft apps installed natively on our devices. And for each subscription, you're allowed to install those Microsoft apps onto 5 different devices. So I've got a computer at work, a desktop at work, a laptop at home, a PC at home, and 1 or 2 other laptops that I use from time to time as well. And I can have all of my Microsoft apps, Word, Outlook, and that sort of thing, sitting on those computers and configured to work in a way that's just like if I was at my computer at work, which from my perspective is awesome. But all of our data is in the cloud, and so that's the way that Office 365 works. You don't store your data locally. It's stored in the cloud, either using SharePoint Online or using OneDrive. And I'll get into a bit more as to how that works for us. But just to re-emphasize, all of our data is in the cloud. All of our applications that we use are accessible in the browser, so you can use all of the Office 365 apps via Chrome or Internet Explorer or whatever, or Microsoft Edge, whatever it is that you want to use. But you are also able to use the desktop apps if that's your preference. And for most of us, the Microsoft desktop apps are the richer way to use their apps. So this is our basic sort of productivity suite, I suppose, and this sort of stack of Microsoft apps is what's commonly referred to productivity tools. So we have Office 365, and one monthly subscription gets you access to Outlook, Excel, Word, OneDrive, PowerPoint, SharePoint Online, Teams, and Power BI, which I'll talk a bit more about those 2 later. They may not be so familiar to people on this call. These things interface to other services that we use. So we have a macro view add-on to Office 365, or particularly to Outlook, Excel, and Word, which is our document management system. This is an Australian company, and basically all of our document management and filing for our files happens through macro view. And actually, I didn't show this well on this slide, but you can file documents directly to their meta files in macro view from Outlook, Excel, and Word. But where macro view is stuffing them is actually into SharePoint Online library. So SharePoint Online is the kind of back end that holds all of your stuff. Zoom Forms is a document automation web app that we use, and that has a add-on to Word. And I've mentioned SharePoint here because this is kind of critical to the infrastructure. You can that's providing us an S drive or a shared folder, if you like, where we can access shared resources, much as you would, in a tree sort of a function. And that also allows us, or SharePoint, we can sort of tunnel directly into SharePoint in a web browser to find all of our meta files if we want to, rather than going to them through macro view or through Outlook, which probably doesn't make a lot of sense until I give you some examples of it. So this is what our native email app looks like. So it's just Outlook, right? So anyone that uses Outlook will recognize this. But over to the right is our macro view file tree. And obviously, for obvious confidentiality reasons, I can't expand all of this. And I've sort of hidden it within the email list as well. I've hidden all of the personal details there. But over on your right, you can see some drop-down meta lists. And this is in a recent, in my recents folder. You can actually access in here all of the Simmonds Stewart clients or client file folders, and under each client that you can access all of the individual matters, and then you can archive them so you don't have the list that long. And it's just effectively a tree structure. And if you want, you can view those. If you go into a particular matter, you can view all of the documents on that file within your Outlook viewer. I do it that way. Other people in the firm actually like to go into the Explorer view, I suppose. So what I'm showing you here is the same information, or the same sort of information that you can access via your Outlook tree. And this is what's called the viewer, or the macro DMF viewer. It's just a version of Microsoft Explorer, and it's presenting the files that have been stored on this particular matter in date order. Again, I've hidden the names and the to column just for confidentiality reasons, but you can see that we've got it structured of clients 1 to D, E to L, M to R, and having opened up M to R, I've opened up a particular client and I'm looking then at their list of matters, and I'm clicked on this matter and you can see them appearing there in date order. And in this particular folder, there's actually only one Word document, but in some folders there could be a lot of Word documents or PDFs, and it's just got sort of versioning that various lawyers would be used to. This is something that this particular viewer is something that's natively on your desktop, but you can access all of these via this file because those folders are all SharePoint folders in effect, via SharePoint in a web browser if you wish to. Some of our lawyers do that because they find it easier to navigate around looking for things. But personally, I only do it if I'm on a computer that doesn't have, I'm on a different computer for some reason that doesn't have the apps that I normally use. And in terms of, I mentioned the S drive. For some reason or other, it couldn't be called the S drive on our computer. It had to be the Y drive. But you can see I've highlighted here within the Explorer the path Simmonds Stewart SharePoint.com company data documents Y, and this is just a typically disorganized, shared folder that would normally called an S drive, and we've got admin, billing, business development, CPD, downloads, blah 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 blah, and this is accessible to any of our staff on via their Explorer or via the Y drive. Now, this is servicing SharePoint folders within your file tree, and so again, you can go to this information on any device via a browser by logging into SharePoint Online. So you're not constrained to access your data just via, or your shared data just via your own desktop. Now, I mentioned that we use the Microsoft apps natively by downloading them onto our computers and then using the actual apps on the computer. But you can use all of those apps with Microsoft just within the browser, and this is what it looks like if you go down that route. And you can see Outlook, OneDrive, Word, SharePoint there. They actually work reasonably well. They've gotten much better over time, Microsoft's presentation of these apps online, but I don't particularly like using Word in the browser because it just doesn't deal with track changes or automated numbering as well. But at a pinch, if you're on a, if you're on a tablet or something and you really need to look at or edit a document, then this is an okay way to do it. And as I say, some people prefer to burrow into all of our folder structures via SharePoint on the browser. So that's kind of, I guess, the data structure that we're, or the basic productivity tools that we're using that will be familiar to lawyers. We're just perhaps using them in a different way via Office 365 rather than using an Exchange server, whether that's an actual server that you own or a virtualized server on some desktop as a service thing. Now, if all we did was moving to the cloud to do that, there probably wouldn't have been so much benefit in it, because it's just really a different way of storing your data and accessing it, I suppose. But one of the sort of key things for us was there was a bunch of cloud tools that we use in our business that you access via the browser that we wanted to be able to sort of build into our work processes and to have operate as smoothly as possible. And that's what I was going to get into in, I guess, the second part of this talk, before going on to answer questions. And I imagine there will be a bunch of questions about stuff to do with sort of data privacy and security and that sort of thing. And, I'm happy to try and answer those questions, and questions about how much all of this costs in comparison to a desktop as a service offering. I won't talk about all of these apps, but two really important ones for us are Slack and Microsoft Teams, the latter being a more recent addition, but Slack is something we've been using for a while. So we try not to communicate as a firm or amongst the internal communications on email. We try to do that via Slack, which is a messaging tool. There's obviously a bunch of messaging tools, but Slack's the one that we like, and it's pretty widely used amongst our client-based technology companies. So it makes it sound cool if we use the same tools they're using. And we try to share information that's, I guess, enduring, which you might call artifacts, or at least that's what people in the tech industry would call them, artifacts, or lawyers might call them know-how, or that sort of thing. Anyway, artifacts that are going to be repeatedly useful. We want to share those on a wiki, and Microsoft Teams is or an intranet, you could call it, an old money, and we use Microsoft Teams for that purpose. We also use Zoom for video conferencing internally, and sometimes we use TeamViewer, and Crowdcast is at the moment the platform we're just using for external webinars, but actually we could use Zoom or TeamViewer for that. So I just want to talk about Slack a bit, because it has been very helpful to our business running distributed teams, and also to bring some cultural, I guess, values to the firm around collaboration, sharing of information, and being sort of talking consistently, I guess, about things that are important to the firm. So this is Slack, and this is a view of Slack, the messaging tool, from within the browser. You can also download the Slack app on your phone, and I think pretty much everyone in the office does have it on their phone. It's not compulsory, but personally I wouldn't be without it. So what we do every morning is everyone posts on Slack what they're up to, the work they're working on, how much chargeable work they've got on, and what business development activity they're up to. What's on here is kind of this is a sanitized view. We haven't got any client names here, but I guess our philosophy is we don't want any individual fee earner to be too busy, and we don't want any individual fee earner to not have enough work. And so this is a good way to surface that. We also want all fee earners to be involved in business development activity, and to kind of feel some ownership and pride when we have success on business development. So whilst this particular slide doesn't necessarily surface that so well, the next one probably will a bit more. So all contact requests that come into the firm via the website automatically get pushed through to Slack. So anyone who contacts the firm, anyone who's asking for work, or asking us about a job or about whether we can help them with something, that will always be seen by everyone in the firm. And when any of the lawyers get a new work lead, or decide that they're going to pursue a new work lead, we enter that into a sales lead platform called Pipedrive, and that also pushes a message to Slack that everyone sees. So Sam Kalen's one of our junior lawyers, and he's posted a new deal there. Now I can say this has been quite transformative for some of our young people, because they've kind of seen that. I guess they get credit when they actually go and find a new client lead, and they get credit when they actually win it. And in Sam's case, he's really taken to that, and he's created a bunch of clients through going out and networking and that sort of thing, including bringing a new VC fund into the firm. And he gets to feel, that's noticed because it gets posted on Slack, and, usually there's lots of emoticons get added on the bottom of these messages and the rest of it. And certainly, the partners definitely notice when the young people are going out and bringing in new business. And it just becomes kind of a cultural part of the firm. So rather than people posting the message directly into Pipedrive to say, I've got a new deal, into Slack, it goes into the sales tool or the sales lead management tool, Pipedrive, and gets automatically pushed in here. And then there's another message that comes through in a different cat when we win the deal. In terms of the more static artifacts, so we struggled really to get a professional looking intranet, and you could still argue that this isn't necessarily that good looking, but this is Microsoft Teams, and it allows you very quickly to build your own intranet and to have information, a bunch of information about the firm or resources that people need to use. You can also use it like Slack for messaging and conversations, but I don't find it particularly good for that. Microsoft tell me it's awesome for that, but I didn't like it so much, and Slack's cool, so we'll keep on using it for that. And I guess this is a segue, but that's one of the beauties of these web tools. Often you just use them for what is best for you, for your own use case. The cost of them isn't large, and certainly Teams is free. It's just bundled with Outlook and the rest of it as part of your Office 365 subscription, so you can try it, and if you don't like it, then don't use it. But it actually is now a key tool for us. So in terms of these forms, we have our new client request form, our new meta request, letters of engagement, and our AML forms as well, and we have some basic letter templates as well that you can operate from here. Actually, all of these are automated, so these don't go to a download of a Word document or anything, or a PDF. They actually go to an automated a web page where you fill in the data, and then that produces the automated output. And I'll demonstrate that next. But this page that I'm showing here is just our general information. So we've got a business development folder and a know-how folder. In the know-how folder, we are endeavoring to surface our whole know-how tree, which I alluded to as part of our S drive. We haven't completely succeeded in that. There's some tricky things to do with the way that SharePoint libraries get surfaced within Teams that have been defeating us, but we hope to succeed on that. And I guess what that's about for me is, as much as possible, I want people to access information in the browser using more modern information tools rather than doing things in trees, if we can. People like trees, but I think moving forward, the web browser will be the best, and in a wiki will be the best place to collect that information. So this is just an example of a client request form that we build ourselves on Zoom Forms, and this collects the information. Firstly, we need to open a client within a practice management solution. It then asks the necessary questions around AML as to whether this is something that we have to create whether it's captured activity or not, and therefore whether or not, or the client relates to captured activity, then that determines whether or not we have to go through an AML process. And we also capture a bunch of informal KYC data, and we capture marketing data as well for a marketing database, or at least marketing data database. When this is filled out, it pushes out a form automatically to our office manager. Also, all of the partners see this email as well with all of this new client data. So we're all across the new clients coming into the firm. And the same thing happens with other things. So a new matter request, that will push automatically to our office manager. It will also push automatically to the partners, so that we're seeing the details of new matters, just so that we're all across what's going on in the firm. We could, without too much effort, push the data directly into our practice management system, but we haven't done that to start with because we'd quite like the human intervention of making sure that the data going in is correct and being approved. We're a bit nervous about the fee earners being able to put data and particularly new client information into the practice management solution directly. We could obviously have it go in there and have it be approved by somebody before you can go further, and that might be the logical step we do, but I guess we're taking these things a step at a time. Anyway, the ability to access these forms on the internet, fill them out on the internet, via the wiki, and then fill them out on the internet via the Zoom forms that we've built ourselves that produce documents that go directly to the right place, including a new client engagement letters and that sort of thing, has created a lot of efficiencies for us and a lot more accuracy in information gathering. So this is, something that we've built ourselves. It's directly fit for our purpose and it's really delivering results for us. Just talking a little bit more then about the tools we use for business development and marketing. Our website runs on WordPress. We have spent a lot of money on that. All the rest of these things we haven't spent a lot of money on, but our website we have spent a lot of money on. And we're able to manage our own content on the website to a fair degree, although not entirely. We do need to involve our developers, with web developers, with some stuff. New contact requests on our website get pushed directly into Pipedrive, and we tend to get at least one of those a day, sometimes 2 or 3, and at least 50% of them turn into actual billable work. New people signing up to a newsletter, they get that goes directly from WordPress to MailChimp, which is, most of you will be familiar with MailChimp. It is a newsletter management tool. It's awesome. That's what we use for our newsletters. And obviously we have people manually, new clients and that sort of thing, but people who opt in via a website, which is kind of one of the key things we're trying to achieve with our website, is people wanting to opt into communications from us. That goes directly into MailChimp. And messages about these things appear at the same time in Slack. So all new newsletter subscribers appear in Slack. And that sometimes can be a prompt that somebody's interested in you, that you were interested in perhaps, having them as a client, and then signing up as a newsletter subscriber can be a good sort of tip that it's time to ask them for a coffee. So this is Pipedrive. Salesforce, I suppose, might be the online sales solution tool or sales management tool, or sometimes referred to as a CRM, customer relationship management tool, that people talk about in the SaaS world. Salesforce, though, is a behemoth. It's an end-to-end system for managing all interactions with sales leads and customers, and it has a lot of process engineering in it that we simply don't need in a small business like us. What Pipedrive does is it enables us to record in one place all potential new client leads that all of our lawyers can access, and all of our lawyers can create new leads in here and move them through kind of a simple standardized process. So in this case, I haven't shown all of the screen because it gets too small, and these are not real. Well, these are anonymized versions of real contact requests that we get. And so they go in initially when we get a contact, we do some research, we then get back to the person, make contact, we then meet them. Meetings are euphemism. Quite often we will just email with them or talk with them on Zoom or Skype or something. And then it goes on to make a proposal and then win the business or something or other. And at any stage, you can mark them as lost if it's just not going anywhere, and you record the reasons for that. And all of this data is searchable in Pipedrive. So whenever we get interested in a new company, we look to see, or we get a new lead for that matter, we look to see what interaction we've had with them. And in the past, and we've got thousands of records of that. Some of that is to do with some automated data collection we used to operate on a website but don't anymore. But it, over time, becomes a very powerful tool. And it's also a powerful tool for just helping the people that aren't so good at business development to follow a process and to feel good about when they have success with it, and also to copy some of the things that other people are doing. So you can open these particular, each one of these is called a deal, and in there you can see all the communications that have been had that have been copied to that deal, including the email back and forth. So if you want to see why somebody's having great success in getting contact requests over the line, you can go and look at their patter in the email side of things and actually try and refine yours to copy them. That's obviously, I've talked a lot, I guess, about the sales side of things, but that's, that's a really critical part of our DNA, I suppose, is just involving everyone in that process and giving everyone access to the same information. On the practice management side, I guess I'm getting into territory that's more familiar to most lawyers. Virtual law firms run some form of practice management solution. We operate Xenox, which is a New Zealand software, or is New Zealand software, a pretty small company, but I think they have got about 30 to 35 law firms on board, including Webb Henderson, who, like us, have offices overseas as well as in New Zealand. So that gave us confidence that they could handle that element of extra complexity. And Xenox it operates in the browser, so you do all of the time recording in Chrome or whatever browser you use. It isn't purely a SaaS solution because we have an instance of Xenox operating within a container, so it is kind of that Xenox operates. So everyone using Xenox sees a slightly different version of it, whereas Xero, everyone sees the same version of Xero. So it's not quite SaaS software, but it operates in the browser, and from that perspective, that meets our needs. And it does all the normal stuff that you'd expect that, Infinity, Affinity, and all of the others do: clients, matters, time recording, billing, and trust account, which we've recently got one of those. It's not super pretty, but it is pretty effective for us. A key thing for us from a practice point of view is we send all of our invoices out of Xero. So we create bills in Xenox and we reconcile all of that against WIP and all the rest of it. But the actual invoice and debtors management we do out of Xero, because, something like 80% of our, or perhaps not that high, but 70% of our clients use Xero as their accounting software. So they want their invoices in Xero. That creates efficiencies from them. Also, Xero is incredibly efficient to invoice out of, and they have a payment gateway. So we invoice. So we include a credit card payment option on our invoices, which is particularly useful for some of our smaller overseas clients, and also some of our startups like to pay on credit card. And having that sort of baked into our Xero invoicing is something that we just, we'd never move away from now. You can set up your own merchant account, and we have actually had one in the past, or actually not merchant app, sorry, payment gateway. But that's a real nuisance, and Xero's one is really good. It is hard doing multi-currency actually on that. We ended up having to change banks for that element of it. But, again, the seamlessness of payment for your clients has a huge impact on your debtors. And, debtors are obviously critical for partners getting paid and also paying all of your bills. So that's where we put a lot of our emphasis. Xenox passes the invoices, or the bills, if you like, to Xero in a fairly automated process, but does require some human intervention each month. We managed to get all of our bills out on billing day, so the first business day of the following month, all of our bills always go out. We never do it over more than one day. And as Xenox has streamlined that process of passing the bills over to Xero for us, we're now often getting our bills done completely by about 4 p.m. And we would have 150 or so bills to send each month. So, I mean, don't have as many as a conveyancing firm, but it's not small, and there's multi-currencies involved, and we're having to deal with all of government sort of billing practices as well. So the ability to get those bills out the door on the first day of the month and then to manage aggressively your debtors has a huge impact on the financial success of the firm. The other thing about having this data in modern applications like Xenox and Xero is that you can access your data and learn things from it. And that's, I guess, a key focus for us is learning about our business and doing our business better. And over time, as we're getting some of this back office infrastructure better and better tuned, that's something we're going to put more effort into. And I won't dwell on this for too long, but this is a view of our client base within Xenox. This is raw marketing data, which I hopefully have anonymized properly. And this is sorted against one particular measure, but we've got something like 5 years of financial data in Xenox now for all of the clients that we've worked for over that period. And all of our clients are categorized into type industry, which is really important. That's industry verticals that we're servicing. So software, SaaS, high tech, services businesses, country, and then size of the clients. So we can look at how much revenue in a particular year we got from startups and how much revenue we got from companies over 50 million in that year. And we can look at that as percentages. We can look at averages for each year to see what's changing. We can obviously look at the absolute numbers as well. But from our perspective, particularly because we do a lot of work for startups, we want to know what the average revenue of a startup client is per year, because we put a lot of effort into getting new startup clients. So if that is, for argument's sake, 5,000 a year on average over hundreds of clients, if you add another 100 startup clients, by that stage, the data is quite powerful because you know what the value of those 100 clients are and therefore how much you could invest in getting them. We also try and record where work came from and to track that. So that's our originator column there. I probably should have had a column there that had me as the originator of everything to make me seem more important. But in this particular little view, it's spread amongst partners. Website is a key originator for us. So this is where people have come to us just from a Google search. And we can see exactly how much revenue each year we're getting from that. And that allows us to track our return on investment and to think about whether our focus on internet marketing continues to be valid. That data can be turned in Microsoft Power BI into some beautiful visualizations. So looking at raw data is interesting, but it doesn't necessarily give you the helicopter view. And this is just something that I did very quickly in Power BI. It took me less than 5 minutes. And this is this is the amount of revenue we got in a period from particular industry segments. And SaaS, you can see yellow was, a decent chunk, and software was probably our biggest client over that, or software companies was the biggest client in this period. You can hover over any of those and see the percentage that it is and also the absolute number of dollars for the period. Obviously, I wasn't going to do that for the purposes of this slide, but the richness of the way you can present your data in Power BI, which comes free with your Office 365 tools, is just incredible. If you're wanting to doing really complicated Power BI visualizations, have to download an editing app that does cost some extra money for the subscription, but you don't need that for simple visualizations like I'm showing here. Then we subscribe and do a bunch of things to do with security. So doing everything on the internet, carries risks, I suppose, but also just having computing devices carries lots of risk, actually, regardless of how your system is architected. So we run all of our account management on Office 365, so that if somebody leaves or goes crazy or whatever, we can switch them off all of our Office 365 applications immediately, and manage their permissioning and that sort of thing. And our outsourced IT provider, Resolve Technology, do that or look after that for us. We manage all of our passwords using LastPass, which is a web service that's an extension to your Chrome browser, and that allows you to use individual, very hardened passwords for every different app, but you can never remember yourself. So you log in once to LastPass, and then you then use that to put in your passwords for all of your individual web applications. We use WebRoot for virus protection on all of our PCs. We're about to implement an Office 365 automated backup system to back up all of our SharePoint data and email data in the cloud. To be honest, I'm not convinced that that's necessary. Your data is pretty darn secure on Office 365, but for the sake of the peace of mind, I think that'll cost us about $600 a year or something across the whole firm. For peace of mind, we may as well do that. The more important thing that we've realized we do need to move to is a two-factor authentication security system, so that people logging on to our applications via remote devices or via new devices have to go through a two-factor authentication process. And if we do have a weakness in the security of our system at the moment, is that we haven't quite implemented that yet. That's not an issue about the security of the devices that your existing laptop or your existing desktop server or your phone, for that matter. It's when somebody in Uzbekistan has your password and logs in from a different computer. Once they've got your password, they can log on to your application, and there's nothing to stop them from doing that. Whereas two-factor authentication would show that as a new device and would have the challenge. And unless you can produce the second authentication, you can't go any further. And the reasons for needing that, I think, are obvious. And I think more and more organisations are going to be operating that system. And we use SMX, a New Zealand company, for spam filtering. Spam's annoying, but also spam is how people get to break into your system and get your password. So they send you fake, email, fake websites to log in, and it's called phishing attacks, and that's how they get your password in Uzbekistan and then get in and compromise your system. So we want to stop those emails from coming in the first place. SMX does that. WebRoot protects us from viruses, but we also want, if despite that, the people factor can still be problematic, which is why we want to use this duo two-factor authentication as well. So that is the quick overview of 40 minutes. So I thought that I would now open it up to questions. And in the past on these talks, I've ended up talking for the whole hour and people haven't been able to ask questions. So here we go. So Ravind Chandri asks, what is your practice management system? So our practice management system is Xenox, and it's would look pretty familiar to anyone that's using Affinity, Infinity, those sort of, it's like a desktop. It's like desktop practice management software that used to be on software and now is operated by the cloud. I would love to be able to use a really SaaS-based, Web 2.0 software system or SaaS system like Clio or something like that, but they don't comply with New Zealand trust account requirements. And also, when I did start investigating how their system works, I found them quite difficult to deal with or to get information out of them. So I'd say that one's a work in progress. But I guess from our perspective, we do as much as we can outside of the practice management solution. So all of our newsletter lists, for instance, we do in MailChimp. We don't do any customer relationship management stuff out of our practice management solution. We just record our time. We open our clients, open our matters, record our time, keep our marketing data, send the bills to Xero, and we invoice from Xero. So Dark asks, and I'm not sure who Dark is. Where's Dark gone? So Dark asks, new privacy bill NZ, bearing in mind data loss can occur by multitude of demons, how does your digital security have sound relevance to local jurisdiction? Well, I don't think jurisdiction has any bearing on data security at all. And data sovereignty, I don't think from the perspective of our clients, or largely private sector clients, really matters. Our software, all of our data, or our core client data on Office 365 is hosted or exists in the Microsoft Cloud, which is Azure, and that will be in Sydney data centers backed up in Australia and possibly to Singapore as well. In the future, Microsoft might have an Azure center in New Zealand, but I don't really care. The key thing is, from our perspective, we communicate our data practices to our clients. It's part of our T's and C's that this is the way we operate our information system. And we've not had a single client ever raise an issue in it. And the reality is that Microsoft's processes for keeping your data secure are far more robust than any local data provider could be. The bigger risks that you run aren't really, I don't think, where your data is located, but just how you protect the security of your fee earner accounts around passwords and that sort of thing, and protection from phishing attacks. The one theoretical vulnerability, or the two theoretical vulnerabilities we have had, have been simply around two-factor authentication, which we are implementing, and backup. Not because somebody else might compromise the system. I think that's unlikely. It's more if we have a rogue employee who then decides to, who gets angry with me, gets angry with the firm and then wipes all our data. That's actually not so well protected in Office 365. And certainly if they wipe your data selectively, that's quite hard to recover from in Office 365. And that's really why we're implementing this spanning system. Now, somebody's asked a good question about could we consolidate our security stuff into a Microsoft product to do mail filtering, single login, and that sort of thing. So our Office 365 licensing is managed. It is a managed service from Microsoft, if you like. We're not using the consumer grade Office 365. We're using the Office 365 for business, and that gives you a whole lot of account management tools, including all of the permissioning and that sort of thing. That's managed, or at least that's set up by our IT provider, Resolve, and we do manage some of it, and they manage some of it in a way that kind of seems to work. You can get a much more sophisticated offering from Microsoft now, or it's about to come in. I think ours costs us something like $12 per user per month, something like that. And for $25 per user per month, you get a lot more of the security hardening that we're going to be getting from other solutions. Also, that allows you a really quick way to roll out your desktop image onto new devices. So at the moment, Simmonds, Stewart, we build our own devices, we buy our own computers, and we implement all of this stuff on the computer ourselves. We don't pay an IT provider to do that, and we've documented how to do that. The reason why we do it is twofold. It's much cheaper for us to do it ourselves. Also, it's quicker. I hate waiting for stuff, and we can just go down to PB Tech and get the stuff immediately and build it, and then we've got the device. and actually usually works. Well, yeah, I don't know if Resolve are listening. I think we often do it, just as well as they do. Sometimes we do stuff it up and things break and we have to fix it. But if we were on this higher cost subscription, $25 a month per user, that process would be easier. The Microsoft image would just be baked into our subscription, and whenever you provision a new device, that would just go. Bearing in mind, the reason why this stuff is easy is there's no networking to set up, there's no network to connect to or anything like that. All you need to do is log into Office 365, and then you've got, well, it's slightly more complicated than that, but you're not having to set up a whole lot of networking stuff that you're used to if you had an Exchange server. So second question, messaging between staff in Slack rather than Teams. Keen to hear about that. You can do messaging in Teams, and when I went to talk with a Microsoft small business person, he showed me how they all did it. It just looks ugly. Like, there's something nice about Slack. It looks really friendly when we're talking to each other. It just it's like you're in Messenger or something like that, and it just creates a nice collegial tone. They've got lots of nice emoticons. It's very easy to upload files. And whereas the Microsoft one, it's just the way it formats it. It's like you're back in Outlook, emailing at each other rather than having a conversation. Slack is also searchable. We've got bots set up there that have automated responses and that sort of thing. I mean, Slack is actually a very powerful IT architecture in its own right. You can actually have all your know-how on Slack if you want to, because its search tools are very powerful. We just don't use it that way. But look, if you like Teams and you were starting from scratch anyway, just trying to consolidate things into one thing, then Teams might be a great way to do it. Terry asks, do we use chatbots to land clients and gather information for form filling? And if so, have you used that particular bot? It's something that we're thinking about. And I think probably we would start with a form filling process rather than teaching a bot to do that side of things. At the moment, we don't have a high enough volume of, I guess, contact requests or new client onboarding to make that investment worthwhile. I think when I think about it, I know that though that Legal Vision, who I mentioned in my last talk in Australia, that they are marketing themselves to the whole small business community in Australia, and that's obviously a massive number of people, and they get a huge amount of inquiry. So for them, having a chatbot to kind of do the triage and get the work to the right place might be useful. They instead actually have a layer of people that are not lawyers, or if they are, they're not working as lawyers, who actually field those sales calls or contact calls. They work out if it is a real piece of work, or if there is a piece of work to be done, and then they'll send it to the person who will do the work, who will be called the delivery person, and they'll have service delivery managers who actually manage the delivery of the service. So the kind of way the kind of workflows that you get when you're working on the internet that a bank might have, or I don't know, an insurance company might have, as to how the website's a first port of call and how you get eased through to a sale and then to the delivery of the product, that there's no reason why all of that can be done for lawyers. It's just a case of whether that's where you want to make your investment. And for us, we haven't done that yet. So Dark has asked, good overview, assuming a peer-to-peer loss of third-party information, besides T's and C's, what then of jurisdictional relevance? I can't actually answer that question, Dark. I don't understand what you're asking, but you're welcome to have another go at it. Dark's registered with our Mail Monkey. That's cool. So we've still got 5 minutes. I'm happy to try and answer any other questions that anyone has. on the cost side of things, I would say the cost of operating our IT this way is half of what it was operating a desktop as a service. And there's good and bad things about that. Obviously, it's great to save money, but it does mean our IT provider don't like us as much. It's not like they really don't like us. It's not like they hate us or anything. It's just they're not as enthused. When we're now a less significant customer because we don't spend as much money on them, they don't get margin. The margin for an Office 365 subscription is very low, whereas if they're hosting you, they get quite a lot of margin out of hosting your service. So we're just not as important a customer. So it takes longer to get them to do things. That's just kind of natural. And that's what's led us into self-servicing a lot more of our own IT ourselves. I guess I find it satisfying, but I like IT. Other firms would hate that. Possibly if we wanted a higher level of service, then, accepting we'd have to pay more, we would move away from a provider that's focused on the legal industry and into a provider that is focused on Office 365 for small to medium business. So Jason asks, what are your views on cloud services like Azure, AWS, etc.? Do you use them to store your documents? So effectively, all of our documents are on Azure. So when I talk about Office 365 and SharePoint, the place that Microsoft put all of that stuff is Azure. So their Azure platform in Sydney runs these tools. We don't need to access Azure directly because we don't need to stand up our own information architecture. We're just using Microsoft's Office 365 architecture, but underpinning what we do is Azure, and it's highly stable. AWS also is, it's exactly the same kind of thing. If Microsoft apps were hosted on AWS, I'd have no issue, running Office 365 on AWS, but obviously Microsoft would never do that. I'm just agnostic to it. I don't see it. I don't need to know about it. I just know that a big provider like Microsoft is going to make sure Azure is highly stable because that's their business name. Yes, Michael, the slides, if you go up through the chat, the slides are already available. Somebody asks about participating lawyer in your template section. I don't know what you're referring to specifically, Michael, but lawyers can use any of the templates. They're free of charge. The only thing that we don't want people to do is commercialize the templates by reposting them on other websites or, charging people a fee for the template as it is. But lawyers can use them to provide legal services to others. It's an open source. They're open source resources in that regard. And we have a lot of lawyers use them. Another Michael asks a good question. Any suggestion for encouraging use of these tools within a firm, thinking about older partners and the less IT capable? It is tricky. I'm 50, getting on to 53, and I lead this stuff, but I guess I'm interested in it. I think you've got to empower your young people to have the opportunity to try things. So Slack came about because Lucy Liu, a young lawyer who came to us from Minters, saw tech companies talking about it on Twitter, and so wanted to give it a go and talked me into it. And now we'd never leave it behind. We were using Yammer at the time, which is a similar Microsoft chat tool, but I didn't see the benefit in moving to Slack, but Lucy did. So I decided, well, I'll support her in that, and it ended up being awesome because Slack's gotten more powerful over time, and Yammer went off in a different direction. I know, I showed Slack to Deborah Dorrington who are a property-oriented firm in Auckland, and she immediately Deb was my age, and she immediately, not tech savvy, but immediately implemented it at her firm, and everyone uses it and they absolutely love it. I think the key really is finding an evangelist, somebody who's going to sell the benefits of a new technology, who's going to be really passionate about it and let them run with it. And if ultimately people don't want to use it, then it tends to suggest that it's not the right technology, I suppose. Certainly forcing lawyers to use the new technology is usually disastrous. Lawyers are quite obstinate like that. And yes, Deborah has just popped up to provide the Law Society guidelines. We looked pretty closely at them, but I guess as much as we could deduce was we have provided you get your clients' consent to what it is that you're doing in the cloud, and you're being responsible around, the security and continuity of your data, then you're golden. And perhaps I'll make this the final question. So Terry asks, any views on Trello? I've heard of Trello. I can't remember what it does. For any of these, apart from the core Office stack of Word, Excel, Excel is probably not as ubiquitous because the Google Sheets thing does the same thing. The core things that lawyers are kind of stuck with, for better or for worse, I think it's for better, but not everyone agrees, is Outlook and Word. Everything else, there's at least one other application that does the same thing. And in the case of a lot of the apps I've talked about, there's dozens of them. And, there's dozens of messaging applications, dozens of wiki applications. Power BI, that's not the leading data visualization tool, although the fact that it comes free with Teams and it's pretty darn powerful and it's not as hard to use as the other one, which is called Tableau, for me makes it a no-brainer. We try stuff and just can it if we don't like it. We use Zoom Forms for document automation. Automio is a good so Zoom Forms is New Zealand developed, or by a Kiwi developer who lives in Nelson. His co-shareholder is an Aussie law firm. But Automio, Claudia King's automation solution is a good one to look at, particularly for this back office web form stuff, where you're wanting just to make your internal processes a lot more efficient and web-based, which really does save a lot of time. So hopefully people have found this helpful, and feel free to post me any, email me questions. I do try to answer them all, following up. And if you've got any ideas on what we can be doing better, I'm always open to hearing them, because, I'm an enthusiast, but I'm not a professional on this stuff. I've just driven hard to do stuff that works for us, but I know that there'll be people doing some stuff that's better out there. So this qualifies anyone or lawyers for a 1 hour CPD. And if you give us about 5 minutes, we just need to upload the email addresses of the attendees. If you go to a website, to the page for this webinar, there's a button on there. In about 5 minutes time, if you click on it, you'll be able to download a form. Well, you'll be able to access a form, and provided you put in the same email address that you used to log in for this webinar, it will automatically send you a CPD letter. And that'll just give you an idea of also just a quick web form that we created using Zoom Forms. That was an hour of work for us to create that. And, I think it's saved me and Fen quite a bit of time producing CPD letters. So thank you, everyone. We won't spam you too much in the follow-up to this, but we probably will send you a feedback email. And as I say, I'll try and answer any questions that people have as well if you want to email me. So thanks again for tuning in.